If you were a kid in the 90s or early 2000s, you likely remember some or all of these shows, and you probably remember wanting to be on these shows. Maybe you had a specific one in mind, or maybe you would have been happy with a spot on any of them, but they were all very different from one another. They all had diverse concepts, challenges, and prizes, and today we're going to compare and contrast just what it meant to participate on these classic game shows. I came up with a mathematical formula to crunch some numbers and score and rank 5 of the most iconic game shows so that I could answer which one had the most to offer, which one was most winnable. And we'll also look at some more subjective factors about being on each of these shows, and in the end I will try to answer which show was the best from a player perspective. Let's get started. We'll kick things off with the oldest show on this list. Wild and Crazy Kids made its debut in 1990, and from its very inception, it always felt like it would have taken great logistical strength to pull off. Essentially, the show would come in and take over some type of big public space. Usually this was near LA, though the show toured other states as well. They would take over a park or a water park, a shopping mall, maybe a beach, and they'd get dozens of kids and their families involved. Sometimes they'd turn the elements of an entire water park into a relay race, and sometimes things would be far simpler, like downhill sledding races, but on apparatuses like pool toys instead of actual sleds. And there was lots of slime, lots of messiness, and lots of pies to the face. If I had to describe the overall vibe of the show in one quick quip, I guess I would say, imagine your elementary school field day makes it to national television. The structure of the show and the games had a bit of variation from episode to episode, but there were always 3 hosts. Originally, this was Annette Chavez, Omar Gooding, and Donnie Jeffcoat, with Jessica Gaines replacing Annette Chavez in seasons 2 and 3. After production decided Chavez looked too mature for the show
that goes anywhere and does anything to find kids having fun.
And yes, these were the actual words spoken in the show's intro. Every episode featured 3 different games, with each host emceeing one. Before and in between the games, the hosts would playfully banter and feud.
Not it either.
What are you guys, chicken?
Hey, nobody calls me a chick.
I just called you false chicken.
Already. You call me what you want. Put a lid on it, I'll tell you.
I looked around to see if I could find anyone talking about being on this show. And if the people on Reddit are to be believed, it sounds like things did get a little too wild and crazy at times, in that some people got hurt on the show. But overall, it sounds like most people who said they were on the show remember their time on it quite fondly. And while I couldn't verify if these people were truly on the show or not, one thing we can go back and find are archived newspaper articles about the show coming into specific communities. These newspaper stories seem to revel in the show dropping by, relishing in the prospect of kids and their parents being brought together in hilarious and playful ways. But the show had no prizes. Let's get into some of the math that will help us rank this show. First off, perhaps I should explain how am I calculating these scores. I went through and calculated what a kid's odds were of winning at least a $100 prize on each show. But for now, I can say that Wild and Crazy Kids scores a 0 for a kid's odds to win a prize of at least $100. This show is going to come in last place for what it could technically offer the contestants. But time for some food for thought. Now, this show had no winner podium or Huffy bicycles or trips to space camp, but does that mean that this would have been hands down the worst of the 5 shows to participate on? Well, not for everybody. Even though I already know it's going to rank last on our list, there really were some unique things about what this show could offer. The show was unique in that winning wasn't really the point, though technically 1 in 3 players on the show would have been on winning teams. But just look at these newspaper articles again. This show was about communities. It really revved up and united them, and it helped people build fond, shared memories, even though, according to this local newspaper out of Utah, the parents cheated. And I think the lack of prizes on this show really helped emphasize that community and sharing really were the real points. And speaking of lack of prizes, this brings me to another point. As for the other shows coming up on this list, if you lost, there was no place to hide. And I imagine that for a kid, a close-up shot of the moment you realized you were not going to be fast enough to win the game, broadcast on national television, probably does not feel great. But on this show, on Wild and Crazy Kids, it took many, many kids to win or lose a game, and any mistakes you made were certainly not spotlighted. In conclusion, this game is probably the lowest pressure of the bunch, and while it has the least amount of reward, there probably is something to be said about having the least amount of risk as well. And with that, let's move on to our second show.
You'll need a lot. Do you have it?
Guts is a total shakeup from Wild and Crazy Kids, completely different. It was a show for the athletes, or so it seemed, according to someone on Reddit, which, again, unverified. It was a show for hopeful young actors and stars. And to get on the show, they say there was essentially a casting call. The fact that 14-year-old AJ McLean, aka AJ from the Backstreet Boys, played in season 1 makes me think there is something to the idea of hopeful stars striving for a place on the show.
Ty, believe me, oh, it's amazing, man. Jeez, it's just bounce up. Oh, it's so confusing.
It does seem that they at least tested athletic ability a little bit. According to Entertainment Tonight, they tested candidates at gymnastic, basketball, and obstacle course abilities, because this show really was only about physical challenges. No trivia, very minimal factors of chance. Every episode featured 5 rounds, with the first 4 varying slightly among episodes. These usually involved an elastic harness in some capacity, but they also had bicycle races, water games, and other challenges as well. The 5th and final challenge, and the most iconic part of the episode, was the aggro crag. In this one, all 3 of the players would race to the top of this mountain. They had to hit all the lights on their path while avoiding rolling debris and climbing up to their buzzer at the top. Could be anyone's game. A fun little fact, also according to Entertainment Tonight, was that they made the executives test out the different challenges on the show before sending the kids on them. According to the adults, they were hard. They were difficult challenges. So how does this show score in terms of what it had to offer kids? Well, this one was a bit tricky to calculate. As far as I can tell, the prizes of the show were only souvenirs. There were gold, silver, and bronze medals for all, and the gold medalist also earned a trophy, or as they called it on the show, a piece of the aggro crag. Now, I had to estimate the cash values of these prizes, and that wasn't easy. I feel like a conservative estimate would be that the trophy and medal were worth $100. I think you could easily sell them for that much today, and I mean probably more than that, but let's just leave it at that since it's hard to say. And for second and third places, just medals, I would say these were worth $25. I don't know. And so, if we look at the scoreboard, we can see that Guts is leading Wild and Crazy Kids. But now, let's talk about the more unquantifiable factors. What special things could Guts offer that some kids might have really appreciated? Well, for one, you got to stand on a podium if you won. You got a real spotlight moment, but behind that great reward, there was a great risk because you also had to stand on a podium in the third place spot if you came in last. As adults, we know that losing a game is nothing to feel embarrassed about, but do we really think that's how your average tween felt about it? But I also think that the particular events on this show were especially appealing for kids. The Wild and Crazy Kids games were really fun as well, but most of these weren't impossible to do on your own in some way. What was stopping you from sledding on a pool toy or getting the kids and parents in your neighborhood to go do a dizzy egg spoon race? But being on Guts, well, how and when else were you going to get to bounce around on an elastic harness, let alone while on national television? So even though this show is going to sit toward the bottom of the list for prize value and what it can technically, literally offer, I don't blame people for putting this one high on their list. If you aren't familiar with Legends of the Hidden Temple, just picture a children's program that's half Jeopardy, half Indiana Jones. At least this was how Marianne Arnberg of the Orlando Sentinel described the program. This game was played in pairs over the course of 4 rounds, with teams facing elimination at each one. Round 1 always started with 6 teams, each made up by 1 boy and 1 girl. These team names and their iconic t-shirts were the same in every one of the show's 120 episodes. They were
The Red Jaguars, the Blue Barracudas, the Green Monkeys, the Orange Iguanas, the Purple Parrots, or the Silver Snakes.
also the same in every episode, the nature of the 4 rounds. In round 1, kids had a moat challenge, in which they had to cross a long swimming pool according to various rules, like walking a tightrope, or swinging, or they'd have to
Hang from the rod by their hands and feet and shinny across to the other side.
4 of the 6 teams would make it through. 5th and 6th places would walk away with a consolation prize, like a backpack if they were lucky, and Star-Kissed tuna if they were less lucky. But for finishing between 1st and 4th, the teams moved ahead to the most intellectual round, the Steps of Knowledge. In this one, they would listen to a talking stonehead named Olmec, voiced by D. Bradley Baker, as he told a story about an important artifact, which is what the episode would be named after, and also the item that the last team standing would need to find in the final round. The Steps of Knowledge round is all about answering questions, but you didn't need any prior knowledge, you just had to pay attention to the story that Olmec was telling. 2 teams would advance from there, with the other 2 teams getting a slightly better prize than tuna, like a straight to VHS Disney movie or a yo-yo. Round 3, or the Temple Games, are kind of the highlight of the show. There are 3 games here. The first 2 feature just one player from each team, and these games are worth half a point or pendant. The third game, featuring all 4 remaining players, is worth a full. More on pendants in a moment. These games were fun, and they could be very physically challenging. They varied quite a bit, but they typically involved a combination of climbing, endurance tests, obstacles, and racing to collect items in some difficult way. In the case of a tie, they would bring out these gong buzzers and they would ask one more question about Olmec's story from before. The winning team was off to the final round, the Temple Run, and the runner-up was given something slightly better than Jafar's return on VHS, like a pair of Skechers.
Skechers footwear, makers of fun.
So, the Temple Run. Now, we have that quote from the Orlando Sentinel about the show being like a combo of Indiana Jones and Jeopardy, but I would say the Temple Run is a combo of Chuck E. Cheese, night hiking, and a stranger danger drill gone too far. Contestants are tasked with having to find the artifact, as mentioned, and it's hidden in a room of the temple, which kind of looks like a spooky open-faced house. And to get from room to room, you have to climb and swing and crawl and jump, and many of the doors are locked as well. This can be fixed by finding keys within the rooms and by completing puzzles, like assembling the Shrine of the Silver Monkey, a task that proved difficult for most contestants. Contestants had 3 minutes to grab the artifact and bring it out. Now, the prospect of getting lost or getting stuck was not the scariest part of the Temple Run. You see, there were these things called temple guards. They were adults dressed up to blend in with the surroundings of the temple, and they would grab kids and demand a full pendant. So, pendants, I said we'd come back to those. Remember earlier, the temple games were worth half or full pendants. Well, this is the only way to escape the temple guards. If you only had a half a pendant or no pendant, then it was game over for you. Time to send in your partner. If your partner got caught and they had nothing and you had nothing, it was game over. The temple guards were very often dressed up as trees. Now, I didn't get this from researching this video. I just remember this from my childhood. It's burned into my brain. There was a game inside the temple where they had to search for a key and they had to reach inside the holes of these trees, but then the trees would come to life and they would grab them. I'm not kidding. Look it up. So just as I said before, the Temple Run round, it rewarded the finalists with 1 to 3 prizes depending on how far they made it. They got a prize just for making it to the final round, a prize for reaching the item, and if they could get the item out of the temple in time, they would win the grand prize. This was usually a trip to places like
Cancun!
or
A cruise to the Bahamas!
Space Camp. Here's the thing about the grand prize. Most people did not win, and I don't just mean the 10 other contestants that were eliminated in earlier rounds of the episode. According to everything I can find online, nearly 3/4 of the teams that made it to the Temple Run did not make it out with the artifact. The Temple Run was just generally hard. If the Legends of the Hidden Temple wiki page holds true, and based on the reruns that I went back and watched when making this video, I'm inclined to think are true, only 32 out of 120 temple runs had winners. This means that only 64 out of the 1,440 kids to compete on the show actually won the grand prize, so about 4%. So where does this show rank in terms of what it had to offer? Well, first I had to determine how likely it was to walk away with a prize worth $100 or more. So this show offered a total of 6 prizes, and everyone would get something, even if it was canned fish. But the third best prize, or the prize for reaching the temple run, was probably worth about $100 apiece. But if they could reach the artifact, contestants were in for a big ticket item like televisions, football tables, or foosball tables, I guess. And finally, if they were part of an elite bunch, part of the 4%, these contestants could win the top prize, a trip. Again, this varied, but it often involved a flight as well as a hotel, or a stay on a cruise ship, or a week at one of the country's most notoriously pricey summer camps, Space Camp. I would give this prize a conservative $1,000 value because it almost certainly would have needed to pay for an adult to at least take these flights and board ships with these kids. But despite the $1,000 prize possibility, the show's rank still doesn't quite surpass Nickelodeon's Guts. Why? Because your odds of winning a prize of $100 or more on the show still sits at only 17%. Only 1 in 6 teams made it to the temple. And from there, your odds of an even better prize were really, really low. But that takes us into our subjective qualities round. Perhaps one of the greatest appeals of the show was the pure challenge of it all. Some kids, I think, prefer the idea of giving their all to a really tough game and losing it fair and square than they do playing an easy game where everyone gets the same free shirt as a prize. Plus, it's just the most imaginative game on this list, I think. It's creative, it's elaborate. Wild and Crazy Kids is field day. Guts is kind of like a decathlon, but with kid-friendly events. But Legends of the Hidden Temple was really unique. There still hasn't been any game show quite like this that centers around a piece of lore with very creative games that match its theme. It had the right amount of brain challenges and physical challenges. It was just cool. And it was the clear winner when I asked this community which show you would have wanted to be on most. Now, this is all despite the temple guards, not because of them, and this is also despite the actual difficulties associated with filming this show. According to tvtropes.org, they would film 3 to 6 episodes at a time, sending a batch of kids across the moat, then off to dry, and they'd wait for other episodes' kids to complete the moat, and so on, until all 3 to 6 rounds were complete. Then 3 to 6 rounds of the Steps of Knowledge, and on and on. And apparently the show pulled some really late hours, and I imagine that the kids who reached the temple run would have been exhausted. Plus, contestant parents weren't allowed in the studio where it was filmed. They had to watch from a green room, and this, I imagine, could have made things a little more stressful for the kids. But anyway, if we look at our scoreboard, we can see that it's not going to top this list in what it objectively offered its contestants in the end. But subjectively, in my opinion, I think this would be, if not my first or second pick, a really close first or second. I need to think about it. We'll come back to this. Let's go ahead and move on. The fourth show we're going to evaluate is Figure It Out. This one always felt like it had such a sweet tone to it, but that's probably at least partially personal. I also just really liked Summer Sanders, the host. She always had such a nice mom energy. Some of the contestants on the show were really little as well, like so little that they would have to turn to her to understand the basic questions being asked and how to answer them, and she was always really sweet about it.
With big blank on back.
What's that have to do with your brother or sister?
I have one little brother.
So the whole premise of the show was that kids had some kind of unique talent or world record or just something special going on about them. And this really varied. In the first 2 seasons, it could be anything. Some of these kids were jaw-droppingly talented. Others were doing things that were just pretty gross. Seasons 3 and 4 had themes, family style and wild style, respectively. Family style just meant that it involved the participant's family, and wild style just meant that it involved animals in some way. The panel's job was to guess the player's secret, which was made up of a handful of words, as represented by these blanks on Billy, the answer head here. This was achieved by the panel taking turns to ask yes or no questions over the course of 3 rounds. The rounds were only a minute long. Now that doesn't sound like it would make a very long game, let alone a 30-minute episode of TV, but the clock would pause for things like the secret slime action. Basically, this was something like saying I don't know or touching your head. If any of the panelists did the secret slime action, they didn't know what it was, they would get slimed because this was Nickelodeon after all. Something special to this show was that they'd pull a random name from the audience and that child guest would win a prize if the slime action occurred, and it almost always did. Sometimes the secret slime action was something like being a quarterback, and this happened on the episode where a quarterback, Cordell Stewart, was a guest. Other notable guest panelists included Steve from Blue's Clues, and Aaron Carter made an appearance, and seeing his cute little face here, it's just honestly, it's more than I can take. Other than the occasional guest, panelists would stay fairly consistent between episodes, and generally they were the stars of Nickelodeon's All That. This included Lori Beth Denberg, Amanda Bynes, Josh Server, Kenan Thompson, and Danny Tamborelli. Whether it was a panel win or a contestant win, the kid would demonstrate their talent at the end of the episode, like country music artist Hunter Hayes did back when he was a very young contestant. With each passing round that the panelists did not guess the secret, the child would win a prize. In season 1, the round 1 prize was always a piece of another television show's set. But in season 2 and 3, it was usually a toy, and a pretty good one, like a trampoline or a bike or a boombox, which was a really nice deal in the 90s, just in case you forgot. Round 2 prizes were generally a step up, sometimes a $300 Toys R Us gift card, sometimes a laptop, which was probably really expensive in the 90s. According to the numbers I could find, all but one time in the show's 4 seasons, contestants won round 2. Winning round 2 also meant moving forward for a chance at the grand prize. Now, I couldn't find any grand list of all the third and final prizes or how often kids won those, so I'm just going to give you some numbers from a very small sample size of episodes that I found on archive.org. The grand prize was won 14 out of 24 times, so about 58% of the time. But not only is this a small sample size, but also only 1 out of 6 kids won in season 2 and 5 out of 6 kids won in season 4, so they might have made the show easier to win as time went by. But for now, here is our scoreboard. We've got Figure It Out in the lead because 100% of the contestants get a big prize. It's really that simple, and so we can already talk about our food for thought or the subjectively good features of this show. So not only did the show give you very high odds of winning a big prize, it was also just incredibly easy. I don't think anything else on this list will come close to a 60% grand prize winner rate like this one does. This show also had a lot of celebrity, and I mean the kind of celebrity that mattered to kids. I mean, this had the stars of all that. If a kid knew enough about Nickelodeon to want to go on one of their game shows, they probably also knew all that pretty well and probably felt like they were about to meet and possibly shock and impress their own heroes. Figure It Out could more or less offer all the best things that all the other shows on this list have going for them to some extent. If you played the family style season of the show, you got to play with your own family, just like on Wild and Crazy Kids. And in the end, everyone got a real spotlight moment. But better than the podium spot moment on Guts, in this spotlight moment, you actually had this opportunity to show off the most unique and interesting thing about yourself. But if you think I'm snubbing Guts, I will of course say that the one drawback to this show was that it was very passive play, unlike all these others. This game was not the most exciting when it came to play itself. They really did have to rely a lot on gimmicks to keep it interesting, I think, like slime and the use of trained monkeys as props. Nevertheless, on objective criteria, this show is our current leader. Let's see if it stays there after our next show. Now, it's important to note that Double Dare 2000 only has a number on the end because this is a revamp from the year Y2K. Double Dare originally aired in 1986 and had some different versions until the early 90s before taking a long hiatus. But we're going to focus solely on Double Dare 2000 because this video is really about this turn of the century era. Double Dare 2000 premiered in January 2000 to a new generation of kids who thought that the show was the first of its kind, including me. The host of Double Dare 2000 was... This show saw 2 families of 4, one dressed in blue and one dressed in red, competing against each other. In some special episodes, they pitted casts of different Nickelodeon shows against each other, like The Amanda Show versus Snow Day the Movie, though wasn't Josh Peck in both of these. Anyway, the show started off with a physical challenge. As an example, I'll tell you about the very first episode I could find of this show on YouTube. Slime, of course, spilled onto the floor, and 2 of the 4 teammates had to sweep it up into a dustpan and pour it up to a line in a glass container. The winner got 25 points or dollars and control of the board. Having control of the board meant that the team had the first opportunity to answer a trivia question worth another 25. Then they got another question and another, and this would keep going for some time, each question getting progressively harder. And once the team reached a question they didn't know, they could hand it over to the other team. If the other team knew it, it was now worth $50. But if they didn't know it, they could send it right back. It's worth doubled again, $100. If the original team couldn't magically come up with the answer that they didn't have 20 seconds ago, they had to take a physical challenge, which was worth 100 points. This was a game with lots of silliness and messiness. It often involved a goofy container, like a giant Thanksgiving turkey, or a hat that had to get filled up with catapulted bananas. And if they won, they got the points. And if they lost, the other team got the points. After this game, there were more trivia questions until the round ended. The rounds would just keep going until the timer buzzed after what seems to be about 5 minutes. Then the process would start over for round 2, but the trivia points were now worth double the score. When the buzzer went off at the end of this second round, the team with the most points proceeded to the final, which was an obstacle course. As a kid, I loved an obstacle course. There were ball pits, slimy things to crawl through, and even gigantic sandwiches. Each apparatus had a flag that the contestant either had to find or reach after some kind of strain to get there. With every flag the family grabbed, a new prize was earned. There were 8 obstacles in total, meaning every family member did 2 obstacles apiece. And the prizes on this show were gigantic. Here's a clip of the announcer, Tiffany Phillips, telling the crowd what one of the families that completed the whole obstacle course won. Yeah, $5,639, and it sounds like this doesn't even include the $500 RS gift card they got during the Triple Dare Challenge, nor the $750 they had on the board before they even made it to the obstacle course, but it's not totally clear. Either way, the show clearly had a larger prize budget than all the others. And with that, let's get into the math. This show would be tied with Figure It Out since the losing family also got at least $200. Now, as a tiebreaker, we should probably just look at which show offered bigger grand prizes, and it would definitely be this one. So with this, we've got to give it up that objectively this show offered the most. But it's not without considering some food for thought. Now, there aren't a lot of archived episodes of this show like there are Figure It Out and Legends of the Hidden Temple, but in the very first full episode I could find on Dailymotion, the blue team won the first game. Then they got some easy questions, then a very tough question that of course bounced to the other team and then back again, ending in a physical challenge for the blue team. Then they won that physical challenge and they kicked off round 2. They won that game as well. And while the red team just had some really bad luck, so they lost, but worse yet, they barely got to play. It's kind of like the kids who go on Legends and get cut at the moat. Yeah, it's not fun to lose, but I'm sure every kid has a talk with their parents on the way to filming where the parents remind them,
"It's not about winning, it's about fun."
But I kind of don't know if the kids are mentally prepping themselves for the idea that they might not even get to play very much. So I would say that even with the good consolation prize, it might have been really frustrating to be on this show if you never got control of the board. I think we could get further into the nitty-gritty of the show as well, because I'm basically just counting it as a win if the family makes it to the obstacle course round. A lot of the show is either lost media or it's just not online, and unlike some of the other shows on this list, it seems like no one has kept a meticulous record of how many families won what and what the prizes were worth and the rate of winning the whole obstacle course or just parts of it, etc. And so here is our final scoreboard according to what the shows literally offered. But based on subjective reasons, here's my own ranking, just in case you're interested. I actually made 2 lists. For this first one, I'm thinking back to what I think I would have wanted as a kid. So I think I have to put Legends of the Hidden Temple first. I just don't think I could resist the chance to try the temple. This is followed by Figure It Out. I mean, I really feel like I could have come up with something just as good as Growing Foot Fungus. Next up, Guts. Then Double Dare 2000, because even though I cannot resist a ball pit, I know I'd be really frustrated and disappointed if my team had bad luck with board control and we didn't get to play. And finally, Wild and Crazy Kids. I don't think it appealed to me as much as the others, because explaining what community meant to me as a 9-year-old sounded like a social studies lesson and not like fun, I guess. But here's my list for if the shows came to my town today and I had to participate in them as an adult. So first on my list is Wild and Crazy Kids. I love the idea of me and my daughter's father competing against her or with her and her friends in some big silly game. I love the idea of it coming to my town, really, but I guess I would have to wait a few years for my own child to be old enough to play. Second on the list, Double Dare, but again, I guess I would need her to be older, and also I'd need a second kid, I think. I don't think I can just bring my dog. Third, assuming this came around and was for adults, I think I'd try Legends of the Hidden Temple, but actually it has come around for adults only on the CW a few years ago. I've never watched it. Maybe I should. It has a really low rating on IMDb. I don't know. Have you watched it? Somebody tell me below. And then next, I guess I'd go with Guts, but I'd have to exercise to get ready because I don't anymore, because I don't have time and my back hurts. But also this can't be 5th because Figure It Out has to come last on this list, because I don't know. I don't think I could come up with something today that's even as good as Growing Foot Fungus. So I would have a lot of anxiety about performing in front of an audience. Anyway, I am way more interested in your rankings than my own. Does it influence you at all when you see the numbers and prizes and prize rates listed here? What about a ranking for most fun to watch? Please tell me in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed reminiscing as much as I did. I do have to ask you to please subscribe. I have plateaued at 37 subscribers, and my goal was to reach 500 by the end of the year. That's starting to look really ambitious because, well, it's almost the end of the year. So please don't forget to subscribe, and please don't forget to vote, everybody. And please stay tuned for a very big project coming to this channel. Take care, and I will see you